This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks broke a four-day winning streak today as the U.S. Fed's minutes tempered hopes of an aggressive easing cycle. That, of course, weighed on MSCI's emerging market index. We saw it ease about 0.4% on the day. Now, in South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange was lower as markets digested those minutes. We saw industrials were down about 1.1%, while banks were also down about 1.17%. Mr. Price slumped about 12% on the day after it announced that its total retail sales grew about 0.5% in the first 4 months of its new financial year. In Nigeria, Ecobank's ETI gaining almost 10% again today. MTN, Nestle and Dangote Cement also topping the gainers list in Nigeria. Now, also coming up on the show. Newly passed a debt relief law in South Africa causes investors jitters. Egypt declares a state of emergency following a decline in water flows. And the new touts in Congo-Brazzaville as women pursue economic opportunities. Well, let's start off the show in South Africa. The country may be staring at a further credit downgrade, and that's following the assent into law of the debt relief bill. Now, the new law is expected to write off debts of low-income earners in the country, with an estimated 9.4 million people seen as beneficiaries. Angelo Coppola reports that some experts see that law as a cause of more harm than good.
It's good news for consumers that fall into those categories, but the National Treasury estimates that debt relief proposals could result in write-offs of anything between $950 million and $1.5 billion of debt, and the banks aren't happy about this.
There are written contracts that mean there's a payment's got to be paid off over time by law. To say we're cancelling those contracts, well, who is going to suffer? The banking sector itself, but not only the banking sector, because their ability to advance credit to the more reputable borrowers is now going to be impacted because the banks have had to take a possible thundering great loss.
We believe it's bad because it brings significant risk into the system, gives the minister significant powers to actually raise the thresholds from 7,500 rand to something else and so on. It actually creates moral hazard in that you're sending out a message that, well, you can borrow money, and if you're not managing your money well under certain circumstances, you don't have to pay it back.
The opposition DA party is concerned that the act will create the appetite among low-income earners to incur more debt with no intention of ever paying it back, creating a massive moral hazard. The lenders responsible for those predatory practices, though, have a lot to answer for.
The problem is that they've been going to those who have been willing to lend to them almost recklessly. They've been lending to them at interest rates which have accumulated interest at such a rate that they now can't afford to pay off the interest on the outstanding debt, never mind the outstanding debt itself.
It's not good for responsible borrowers because it creates hazard there. And it actually sends out a message that we're interfering in what the market can sort out.
Trade Union Federation COSATU says it's one of the most pro-poor and pro-worker acts to be passed by the country's parliament, that there's a bigger issue facing banks, consumers and the country.
So all of that put together could result in banks being very reluctant to lend in that market, if at all. If they do lend, they'll price for the risk and then that will go up. And what that means is that you're actually crowding out low-income borrowers from the formal sector.
Moral hazard and risk are words that are being introduced into the financial services sector, something that the ratings agencies don't want to hear. But for those who are indebted, it's a sense of relief that they're starting to feel. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's delve further into the discussion around this new debt relief law. Of course, Angelo is joining us now in Johannesburg. Angelo, great to have you once again on the show. Now, a lot of unanswered questions around this new law. Some analysts are saying that this new bill may not deal as severe a blow to the banking sector as we initially thought. Of course, they'll be able to classify that debt under the new law under their impairments. Of course, that'll help mitigate its effects. Now, looking at all this, give us a sense of the debate around the impact of this new law on the banking sector.
Well, look, no one's very clear about how this restructuring of the debt into the different parts of a bank's balance sheet is going to work. The banks have to adhere to strict international accounting practices and rules and regulations. And unless I've missed anything or missed something, the rules couldn't have changed or been modified overnight, as it were. It's still going to appear in the financials of those banks under liabilities, and that's just putting it simplistically. Impairments are also going to have to be provisioned for in some form or another. BASA, the Banking Association, says its members, the banks, of course, remain very concerned. It's still a debt that will have to be written off. The number crunchers, of course, will be looking at ways to treat the debt. There's no question that they've already started doing that and have been doing that for some time now. But there's no doubt that the price of loans is going to be out of the reach of those low-income earners who desperately need it. And it's going to drive those desperate people into the arms of the loan sharks. And that's not in doubt either.
Well, Angelo, analysts are also saying that retailers in the country, especially those with customers using credit, will also be impacted by this new bill. But of course, they also have already provisioned for this under their bad debts. How so? Explain that to us, Angelo.
Well, look, the way it works with many of the retailers in South Africa, it doesn't matter what retail sector they're in, they're running their own finance departments or divisions, and they're providing credit to their customers outside of the formal banking sector. So there's no the exposure is doubled. So people in the banking sector are taking those small loans, and then people in the retail sector who are taking these loans. And it's under their own rules and regulations. Many of their customers, of course, would fit into that low-income earner category that we've spoken about, but it covers things like food, furniture, and even in some instances, food. It's brought on credit, and the interest rates, while they are regulated, are higher generally than the high street bank rates are at the moment. That retail credit sector, of course, has been and has seen some horrendous stories of consumers getting ripped off over time. It's, of course, a lot more regulated now these days, but the size of some of their debt books would make many people's eyes water. And that's where we are most likely to see most of the pain and damage inflicted going forward, Uche.
Now, given the controversy surrounding this bill, it could face some obstacles in its implementation. Of course, it might face a legal challenge, for example. Is it likely to face significant opposition going forward?
Well, look, the banks via their association have said to me that they will continue lobbying the DTI, that's the Department of Trade and Industry. That's the department that is now responsible for regulating or providing the regulations and providing that implementation date that nobody has just yet. Interestingly enough, though, it's not the Department of Finance who's involved in this process at all. BASA, which is the Banking Association, have suggested that they would consider their options. They did stop short of threatening any kind of litigation or legal action, but this is business, and bankers can be hard-nosed, especially when their business models are affected or under threat. They are still irked, of course, that their recommendations that they provided to the Portfolio Committee in Parliament a couple of months ago didn't even appear in the final act. So we may well see some delay in implementation due to any potential legal action from maybe some NGOs possibly, or lobbying from the Banking Association on the regulations. But it's unlikely that the banks are going to take this lying down. And meanwhile, of course, in the background, those rating agencies will be taking notes, especially if the banks suffer losses due to this fairly large debt write-off that we're probably going to see in the next couple of years. Uche.
All right. Well, we'll certainly keep watching. Many thanks, Angelo, for that update. Of course, Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now to Egypt. Cairo has declared a state of emergency due to a decline in water flow from last year. Now, annual water level measurements are announced in August every year. A government statement now indicates that all departments of the Water Ministry will be kept on highest alert to periodically check the the water situation in the main riverbed, all canals and water channels in the governorates. Here's Yasser Hakim with more.
The Ministry of Water Supply has been on high alert to deal with the loss of over 5 billion cubic meters of water because of the low Nile flood levels. Experts say, however, that Egypt's water share of the Nile has not been significantly reduced. The problem is that water consumption is increasing annually because of the rapid population growth. Egypt needs 114 billion cubic meters of water per year, and what's available is less than half that amount. The North African country has been listed as one of the states suffering from extreme water poverty.
The water waste in Cairo alone is over 1 million cubic meters per day because of the wrong attitude by citizens, such as washing cars, using water hoses in the streets, and water abuse in gardening and agriculture. There is also the rundown plumbing in state-owned schools and government offices. We are working on fixing the infrastructure of these facilities and placing photo cells to avoid water leakage.
The Nile is the main source of water for Egypt. Now the government is trying to create new sources of clean water.
There are
important water recycling projects which save water, especially in agriculture, the Delta and Upper Egypt. There are also huge desalination projects underway in the Red Sea, Sinai, and the north coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It's an aggressive plan to produce clean drinking water.
There's been an extensive awareness campaign for farmers in water conservation.
The government is working with farmers to reduce the cultivation of rice because it's a high water consuming crop. They are replacing it with other low consuming crops and penalizing farmers who break the rules. They also train farmers on modern irrigation methods to save water.
Strict laws have also been put in place to prohibit water waste.
The new law slaps a hefty fine of 2,000 to 20,000 Egyptian pounds on individuals, depending on each case. More fines on companies and industries.
In ancient Egypt, August was a month of celebrating the Nile floods every year. But lately, it has become a period of concern, as water scarcity is a growing threat to people's lives. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now look at our corporate headlines for the day. South African budget retailer Mr. Price has posted a 2.5% drop in sales from its fashion stores, its biggest division, in the first 4 months of the new financial year. Now the company says a weak economy in the country forced it to slash its prices. As a result, the group's shares plunged to their worst level in more than 2 years. Group retail sales over the period rose about 3.6% in the last 2 weeks of the period. Meanwhile, Uber Kenya has announced that prices will increase up to 29% for its UberX drivers from next week. The cost of journeys could rise 13% in other segments as well. The decision is a big win for its drivers who have been pushing for fare increases, citing high operating costs. Now, the price increases come just weeks after its biggest rival, Bolt, removed the budget fares option known as Bolt Go, effectively raising charges for its users. And South African miner Exxaro Resources has reported a 42% rise in half-year headline profits as income from equity investments offset lower core earnings. Headline earnings per share rose to 17.3 Rand per share in the 6 months to the end of June. Income from equity investments rose to $192 million in the prior period. The company says it's planning structural changes, including clean power initiatives, to make the business sustainable in the long term. And lastly, Amazon.com has launched its biggest campus in the world in the southern Indian city of Hyderabad. The move underscores its expansion plans in the country that has been one of its fastest growing overseas markets. Now, the new campus in India, spread over 9.5 acres and costing hundreds of millions of dollars, will house over 15,000 of its employees. Founder Jeff Bezos has committed over $5 billion for India's operations as the company seeks to fend off competition from Walmart's e-commerce unit called Flipkart. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. let's head into a short break now, still to come on the show. Economist Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok takes over in Sudan. And Tanzania's coastal aviation launches a green campaign to try and offset its impact on the environment.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Well, let's head to Sudan now, where the ushering in of a prime minister and the sovereign council is expected to help steer the country to growth. Well, Economist Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is expected to form a government of 20 ministers to be selected by the opposition Freedom and Change Alliance on August 28th. Take a look.
The swearing-in of Sudan's new Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and other council members is seen as a further step in transition towards civilian rule.
شعار الثورة العميق.
The revolution's deep-rooted slogan, freedom, peace and justice, will form the program of the transitional period. Allow me to accomplish the central demands. The number one priority is to stop the war and build permanent peace. We are working to alleviate the suffering of our people in refugee camps. Stopping the war will also depend on resolving the dire economic crisis and building a national economy based on productivity and not on blessings and donations.
في معسكرات اللجوء.
Hamdok's appointment comes as the outgoing head of the military council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, was sworn in as a leader of the new sovereign council. The body will run the country for 3 years until an election after decades of autocratic rule. It replaces the transitional military council that took charge after months of deadly street protests brought down the Islamist ruler in April. The new rulers, however, have the in tray full. It includes pushing for the lifting of the country's suspension from the Africa Union and from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. The other daunting challenges that await the rulers include reviving the economy and unifying a country still plagued by unrest in regions. Chomgono, CGTN.
Now, in Tunisia, the number of individuals operating foreign exchange bureaus in the country licensed by the country's central bank has risen. The bank has approved a total of 45 applications to open such offices in a bid to tackle the informal market. CGTN's Adnan Ashaushi has the details.
Omar is a university graduate who runs his own individual or manual foreign exchange office on Habib Bourguiba Avenue in downtown Tunis. He was trained at the Academy of Banks and Finance and submitted the original copy of a bank guarantee for the benefit of the central bank for an amount of about $20,000.
This office eases pressure on banks and allows tourists and Tunisian nationals to exchange foreign currency. It encourages traceability and transparency.
Many businesses and professionals are now familiar with the new concept of the Foreign Exchange Office. People have welcomed the initiative, which was put in place by the Ministry of Finance and approved by the Tunisian government.
The exchange rate is imposed by the central bank. It's legal and the service is very efficient. I prefer to exchange dollars or euros at these offices instead of waiting at the bank.
The Finance Commission at Parliament states that owners of the manual foreign exchange offices should not have a criminal record and are not subject of a bankruptcy judgment. In addition, they are enjoying civil rights and are not convicted of an international offense or a crime.
The black market has ruined the economy and millions of dollars are controlled by smugglers. These licensed individual foreign exchange offices will help legalize the purchase and sale of foreign currencies.
Any person holding Tunisian nationality and a manual exchange training certificate issued by the Academy of Banks and Finance is eligible to exercise manual exchange activity through exchange offices. The opening of the individual foreign exchange offices is subject to the provision of the Central Bank Circular No. 7 of 2018, stipulating the eligibility conditions for the pursuit of this activity, as well as the causes that may lead to the revocation of its authorizations. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And meanwhile, in Tanzania, the country's airline Coastal Aviation Group has launched a green campaign to try and offset its impact on the country's environment. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo reporting.
Coastal Aviation specializes in flights into Tanzania's top tourist destinations. Now it's launched a Go Green campaign to reduce its impact on the environment.
So we're partnering with Wild Aid, we're partnering with Carbon Tanzania to create some great impact, to actually drive people's conscience for carbon offset and create that behavior.
Coastal says it can offset its carbon emissions with this partnership. Carbon Tanzania is an organization which works on natural forest conservation. Airlines are major contributors to emissions worldwide due to the large amounts of fossil fuel needed.
Nearly 4 billion passengers will fly on airplanes worldwide this year. Those journeys account for nearly 3% of all global carbon emissions. These airlines hope that others will follow its example and reach new heights by going green.
Meanwhile, its partnership with Wild Aid supports conservation activities to protect the animals their customers fly to see. Many environmentalists claim the best way to reduce the impact of the aviation industry would simply be to reduce the amount of flights people take. But Coastal hope it can make a difference to the environment and also its brand.
And also it's going to attract more customers in terms of tourism to use their airlines because they show that they are doing tourism in a responsible way.
Coastal has also stopped providing single-use plastic water bottles on flights, saving about 16,000 bottles of plastic waste per month. It's also reducing printing and using LED lighting.
At the moment, it's Coastal that are choosing to pioneer in Tanzania. We're really proud to be that. That's the legacy that Coastal has always been. So we're really proud to be doing this stuff. We hope all of the other carriers will follow suit because ultimately that's saving our world.
And if Coastal's climate plan takes off, other airlines may follow suit. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Now, African governments are increasingly looking at ways of reducing over-reliance on hydroelectricity. Here in Kenya, the use of biogas is expanding to include not only households, but also businesses and large institutions, which are seeking to meet their energy costs. Here's CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy with more on that story.
International, regional and national stakeholders meeting in Nairobi are working towards supporting the biodigester sector in Kenya. Under the theme, Investing in Biodigester Technology for a Greener Economic Transformation, Experts echoed the need for innovative mechanisms that can help families access clean and affordable energy.
We need to emphasize on training. When proper training is done, you can be sure we are going to have proper awareness and the product will be able to be pushed up.
Kenya is currently working towards a commercially viable domestic biogas sector that would contribute towards food security, clean, sustainable use of energy, and environmental conservation. Rose Kiarie is a resident of Kiambu and one among an increasing number of Kenyan dairy farmers who are turning to green energy to power their farms. Kiarie is using the gas generated using cow dung to power her farm and light her home, cook food in the kitchen and boil water in the bathroom.
I don't use electricity to boil bath in water. I use biogas to boil my water. I also use biogas to boil water for cooking, so it really helps me a lot.
We ventured into biogas as a pilot project with 300 women at Kamwet Cooperative Society, and the lives seem to have changed a lot in the last 3 years.
Kiarie mixes water and cow dung from the dairy unit, which is put into a biodigester from where it's broken down to produce methane. She also uses the waste from the biogas unit to grow her crops, including maize and mangoes, making the dairy enterprise a very profitable venture.
Sub-Saharan Africa continues to suffer from a major energy crisis, with hundreds of millions of people lacking access to electricity and clean cooking fuels.
The Kenyan biogas now envisions all Kenyan households accessing and utilizing green energy for their homes and organic fertilizer for their farm as one of the ways of protecting the environment. But challenges still remain, as many find the initial installation cost expensive. Daniel Arab Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, a recent deal between Kenya and China for the exports of avocados is creating new farmers in the country. Nakuru, a county in western Kenya, has begun initiatives to encourage increased avocado farming. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro reporting.
Kenyan avocado exports to China are set to increase by 10% annually over the next 3 years, with the full implementation of a 2018 deal between the two countries. Kenya will export avocado to China. The deal also includes providing seedlings to farmers who cannot afford to facilitate for large volumes of the butter fruit. According to the Kenyan government, Chinese traders are actively scouting for new opportunities in the Kenyan market to get avocados. And farmers are happy to have access to the new market.
It's not being absorbed by our traditional buyers. We'll need to have to be absorbed elsewhere. And so the opportunity that the Chinese market offers is just that part of diversifying marketing arrangement.
Currently, Kenya's famous avocado destinations include Europe and the United States of America. On average, a Chinese family consumes at least 3 avocados a day, which can be deduced to mean a market opportunity of about 4 billion pieces of avocado per day. Experts say that when the agreement is fully implemented, the Chinese market will take in more than 40% of Kenya's avocado produce, making it one of the largest importers of the fruit.
That's normally between 30 to 35 days sailing time into China. So once in China, then in Shanghai, we will have it cleared by customs and ready for distribution to the various parties.
Currently, Nakuru County is establishing an industrial center in Naivasha that is connected to Kenya's standard gauge railway. Soon after grading and packaging, the refrigerated containers of avocado can be sent directly to Mombasa, then China. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come. China to retaliate if the U.S. proceeds to impose additional tariffs on Chinese goods next month. And UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson continues a charm offensive for a new Brexit deal against fears of insufficient time.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads.
we celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Past the hour, let's recap today's top headlines. Foreign Minister of the internationally recognized government of National Accord in Libya says the humanitarian and security situation is alarming. Now, speaking while in Tunisia, Mohamed Tahar further said the assault on Tripoli has had a negative impact on Libya's economy. Thousands of Libyan families have escaped to neighboring Tunisia. And in Sudan, Sovereign Council members have taken an oath as the country's governing bodies fill their vacancies. Economist Abdallah Hamdok has been sworn in as interim president. But as the nation's leadership takes form, tension between opposition groups and the military may become a major obstacle. And Kenya is scaling up lobbying for international support in efforts to win a seat in the crucial UN Security Council. The country's bid to succeed South Africa was boosted by a win at the Africa Union over Djibouti. And Nigeria closes in on attaining a polio-free status after making 3 years since its last reported case of wild polio virus. Now, health experts are saying it is a significant milestone that could lead to the entire continent being declared polio-free. Nigeria previously held the unenviable record of being one of 3 countries in the world where polio was still endemic. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, on the international front, China's Commerce Ministry says the ongoing trade war with the United States is harming both countries. Now, if the U.S. insists on raising additional tariffs on Chinese imports starting next month, there will be consequences. CGTN's Sun Tianyuan reports.
China's Commerce Ministry says if Washington raises additional tariffs on Chinese goods, it will put the country's economy and enterprises to test. But China remains confident and ready to cope with the challenges.
There is no winner in a trade war. American enterprises and consumers will also suffer great losses. The U.S. should stop exacerbating the situation single-handedly and find a mutually beneficial solution with joint efforts.
Chinese tech company Huawei is among the victims of the trade war. In May, Washington banned the company from buying components from U.S. suppliers. Later, Washington gave Huawei a temporary license to purchase some goods. On August the 15th, Huawei was granted a 90-day extension, but dozens of its affiliates were also placed on a U.S. blacklist.
China firmly opposes the U.S.'s new restrictions against Huawei, using state power to suppress the company on the pretext of national security. China hopes the U.S. can be fair and square without discrimination when it comes to Chinese enterprises.
Gao says the ministry is working on its own version of an unreliable entity list for foreign companies and will release it soon. The ministry stressed again that China is not afraid of a trade war and will fight back if necessary, and it hopes the U.S. can correct its wrongdoing and return bilateral trade to the right track. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
And shifting focus now, let's get the latest on Brexit. Well, French President Emmanuel Macron has told Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson there's not enough time to negotiate a new Brexit withdrawal agreement. German Chancellor Angela Merkel challenged Britain to come up with alternatives to the Irish border backstop within 30 days, which of course is a challenge which Johnson readily accepted.
I need to be very clear. In the coming months, we will not be trying to find a new withdrawal agreement far from the basics. If there are things in the framework of which Michael Barnier had negotiated that can be adjusted are in compliance with the two objectives that I have cited, stability in Ireland and integrity in the single market, we have to find them in the coming months. If not, this means that the problem goes deeper, that it's more political, one surrounding a British political problem, and at that point, it's not the Brexit negotiation that can fix it. It's a political choice that the Prime Minister will have to make. It's not for us to do.
Well, let's get more on that meeting from our correspondent Richard Bestick. He joins us now in London. Richard, great to have you on the show as always. Now, it certainly looks like Boris Johnson's charm offensive, it did not have much effect with Macron or Merkel. Give us a sense of what the tone was coming out of these meetings. Did they yield any common ground between Johnson and, of course, these EU countries?
Uche, Johnson's back in London now, and I think the best way to describe the tone in Paris and before that Berlin can probably be polite, listening to the demands from the UK's new Prime Minister, which the EU has already said interminably are impossible. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel outlining yet again why they believe there needs to be built into the withdrawal agreement some kind of protection against a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and the North under British rule. And Boris Johnson said again he won't have any of it. Nonetheless, he was received well. Lots of handshaking and backslapping at the Élysée Palace in Paris today. However, as with Berlin yesterday, Uche, not a great deal achieved other than giving the UK Prime Minister the opportunity of saying, well, at least I tried.
Well, Johnson, of course, has maintained that he is prepared to take the country out of the EU with or without a deal on, of course, the October 31st deadline. Does Johnson have a plan B, especially over the next 30 days?
Uche, there is no plan B. Britain's Brexit policy under Johnson is simply to demand the European Union ditch the backstop and renegotiate the withdrawal agreement, or Britain will leave the EU without any kind of deal, reverting immediately to third country status with no trading arrangements whatsoever. Here in London, some observers are saying that Johnson made the journey with what appears to be a plan to allow his no-deal cabinet and the British press to say the EU is being intransigent, refusing to talk, launching the inevitable blame game that will quickly follow Britain's departure if there's no deal.
Well, at this stage, Richard, a no-deal Brexit is seeming more likely. And according to the UK government, according to its own forecasts, a no-deal Brexit could plunge the country into economic chaos. Now, Boris Johnson, he claims to be seriously prepared for a no-deal Brexit. Is the UK really ready to exit without a deal?
Well, this is Operation Yellowhammer, the UK government's own assessment, as you say, Uche, of the economic impact on Britain should it leave without a deal. It could include shortages of food, medicines, and chaotic scenes at British ports as trucks line up to process paperwork that's not been used for more than 40 years. Government ministers, they're now dismissing it as an old report, although quite how old they won't say. And we're told now the country's much better prepared for a no-deal Brexit than under Johnson's predecessor, Theresa May. And the government is certainly spending a lot to prepare, billions in fact. The idea apparently being the more they spend, the more the EU will believe the country will actually do it, and then the EU will cave in to Britain's demands. Some jokers likening it, though, to a policy of holding a gun to your own head and saying, give me all your money or I'll shoot myself. As a policy, if it should crash and burn, be ready for a general election, possibly this autumn. But, Uche, nothing's certain. And like Berlin yesterday and Paris today, nothing's changed.
Right. Well, it's always great to have your insights there, Richard. Of course, that's Richard Bestick joining us there in London. Well, let's shift our focus now to the tech space. Brain-computer interaction. That could become the next big acronym, such as AI for artificial intelligence and, of course, IoT for the Internet of Things. Now, it is a technology that might bring Superman into reality and at least looks to be able to read one's mind. Well, CGTN Sanya shows us BCI is already one of the buzzwords at this year's World Robotics Conference.
He only needs to think. No need to use his hands, no need for a keyboard. We've asked him to mind spell the Chinese characters for CGTN. And with this system developed by Tsinghua University, which builds on brain-computer interface technology, or BCI, he can. The computer has picked up and deciphered the brainwaves and acted on them.
The best subject for BCI technology is somebody like him, who has a strong brain signal and is able to focus hard.
You just need to focus on which consonant syllables you want to choose. When the system detects the choice, it appears. It just needs a little more attention than simply thinking.
We hope it can help people like Hawking, who have L's or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and cannot move their bodies. Sadly, the physicist passed away before dawn of this technology.
The idea of brain-computer interface came into being decades ago. Professor Gao Xiaorong, among the first to pursue the technology in China, says it's only recently that it's been proven scientifically feasible.
The paradigm we started was for medical purposes, giving ALS and stroke patients new leases on active life. After more than 10 years of research, the scientific arch has been acknowledged and accepted. It goes from brain-computer interface, then to interaction, and finally to brain-computer intelligence.
And now, with technological advances, Gao says BCI has suddenly heralded even more broader possibilities.
With artificial intelligence coming into the picture, BCI research has new branches. It's assumed that if human intelligence can bridge and work with the more powerful machine intelligence, the two intelligent agents can combine to become Superman.
Gao says a superhuman won't materialize in the near future, but at the World Robot Conference BCI section, participants are certainly trying to get there. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, healthcare is one of the industries most primed for automation adoption. In Thailand, a hospital struggling to cope with soaring numbers of patients is now using robot nurses. Now, the robots are built by a Chinese tech company. They are seen as a potential tool to help relieve strain on healthcare workers. CGTN's correspondent Dusita Soke reports.
It's what you would typically see on a Thai hospital floor. Doctors, nurses running back and forth, and patients, some waiting up to 6 hours a day for a consultation. It's a problem that has plagued Thailand's healthcare system for decades. There just isn't enough nurses to meet the demands of the population. But then, this appears, like something plucked from a sci-fi movie set. Strange as they may seem, Mongkut Watana Hospital in Bangkok believe they have figured out a solution, a logical way to improve their services and make life easier for their personnel.
At this stage, robot can fill the gap to some job of nurse only. We don't intend to replace robot to the people, but We try to replace some job that is not very important for the people. For some back office, I think robots can help them a lot.
These 3 new additions to the hospital floor came all the way from China. Built by a Chinese tech company, the robot nurses named Nan, Nim and Ni spend their days ferrying documents between 8 stations, taking care of administrative tasks and patient information. These mobile nurses are automated guided vehicles and travel along these magnetic strips on the floor. They are fitted with sensors that allow them to stop if a person or object gets in the way. Clocking several kilometers each day, the nurses here say that these robots improve efficiency and reduce human error. AI and robotics are redrawing the healthcare landscape, and Thailand's aggressive push in medical innovations goes beyond just their desire to lead ASEAN in medical care. For this hospital, the possibilities of robotics are endless. Customizable, they look to expand the responsibilities by placing them in the pharmacy to prepare drug dosages, help out in the kitchen and laundry. Robots can do a lot, but humans are not obsolete just yet. Nursing is a profession that relies heavily on the human touch.
Nursing is a delicate job that requires a human's attention to detail, such as inserting a nasal gastric tube or giving patients injections. These things require the skills of nurses.
For now, this trio of bots glide slowly and silently across the floor in their bright yellow nurse uniforms with their blazing massive red eyes. Creepy and disturbing for some, entertaining and amusing for others. Whatever the case, with Thailand's rising healthcare costs and workforce shortages, it looks like these robotic nurses will soon become a necessity rather than a novelty. Dusita Saogao, CGTN, Bangkok.
Now, American aerospace firm Boeing recently unveiled its new Starliner spacecraft that will participate under the National Aeronautics and Space Administration program. Its primary purpose is to transport space crew to the International Space Station and private space stations.
A crew of seasoned astronauts is gearing up for training for a manned mission to the International Space Station. The exercises including training underwater to simulate spacewalks, responding to emergencies, and practicing docking maneuvers on a flight simulator. This will all be aboard Boeing's new Starliner spacecraft, which is expected to be used in the near future to ferry tourists into space.
It's getting exciting. I mean, not often do you get to fly a brand new airplane, and even less frequently do you get to fly a brand new spaceship, but it's getting pretty exciting. It's getting pretty real, too.
The mission was scheduled for August. However, it has been delayed until 2020 due to technical issues. Several private companies, including SpaceX and Boeing, are competing to resume human space flight following the end of the Space Shuttle program in 2011.
So far, we've only had about 500 people go to space. That's so few compared to the 7 or 8 billion people on planet Earth. And so this opportunity with the Commercial Crew Program is really going to open up the frontier so more and more people can go to space. So hopefully in the next 10 years, it'll go from 500 to 5,000, and the next 20 years, maybe even 50,000 or more. It would be great to have more people see what I've seen.
NASA relies on Russian technology for the execution of its space program. In efforts to change this, it is paying SpaceX and Boeing a combined $7 billion to build rocket and capsule launch systems for ferrying astronauts to the space station.
I think the idea is to make space be and seem a little bit more of a friendly environment. I don't think we'll ever get to the point that carrying passengers in a spacecraft will be like carrying passengers in an airliner, but we're a company that does both, and we're going to do our best at making it as safe and comfortable as it can be for somebody who maybe didn't grow up as an astronaut.
Chris Ferguson, a former NASA astronaut and retired U.S. Navy captain, will lead its maiden voyage.
I wish everybody on the planet would have the ability to take a lap around the planet once, just to see it from that perspective.
The complexity of building multi-billion-dollar spacecraft capable of shedding Earth's gravity is considered common. However, once the risks are assessed and the test flights concluded as successful, this is set to offer a new perspective into how we see the world. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
Well, shifting focus now, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices dipping as investors locked in profits on the day. Of course, the focus was on focus did shift to Friday's expected speech from U.S. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. Meanwhile, oil prices steadying above $60 a barrel. They were supported by a drop in U.S. crude inventories as well as OPEC-led supply cuts, although some worries about the global economy did weigh on prices today. Well, let's take a quick break. Still to come. The new touts in Congo-Brazzaville as women pursue economic opportunities.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, Denmark's Lego is investing about 150 million US dollars until 2030 in order to create bricks that are not harmful to the environment. Well, its first plant-based components were released in 2018, but now the company is introducing an eco-friendly set, which has got Lego fans going gaga. Well, CGTN's Julie Shire tells us more.
For years, this is what Lego bricks have looked and felt like. These building blocks have kept children entertained for generations. The much-loved toy brick company is now trying to save the planet, one little piece at a time.
Lego released its first plant-based kit just weeks ago. It's made up of 3,000 pieces, and all of the botanical features are made from eco-friendly plastic.
So this is the Lego Ideas Treehouse that was released internationally on the 1st of August. And you can see that all of these top elements, which in the set are leaves, but are actually made out of cane and are completely biodegradable. And there are more plant elements around the set and even here in some of the detail of the set.
Lego produces billions of components every year, which travels to over 40 markets. It's hoping to transform its production line in the next 10 years.
So Lego's strategy by 2030 is to have all of their components that we use to build the sets with completely sustainable by the year 2030. And by the year 2025, to have all packaging and elements of the packaging completely sustainable and biodegradable.
Lego is an important learning tool for millions of children. It's an equally fun hobby for adults. But don't throw away the iconic blocks just yet, because they still fit perfectly with the new components.
I think it's a very clever idea because it doesn't harm anyone or anything. It's very creative, and if you forget how to build it, you can just think of a new idea.
Plastic Lego bricks have been around for 50 years. They are passed down through generations and seldom end up in landfill sites. But should one of the new eco-friendly blocks land in the trash, it will disappear a lot sooner than plastic. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And staying in the country, if you're a beer connoisseur, here's something from South Africa to tickle your taste buds. In honor of Women's Month, brewing giant SAB Miller has launched its first women-crafted beer. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with the story.
A secret recipe and a team of diverse women are the brains behind the brew. It's the first South African beer ever to be created and crafted by an all-female team.
The aim of the campaign was to go into a new space and to prove that women can create great work no matter where they go. And in this case, it was in the beer industry, which is a space that I think women aren't expected in.
We wanted a message of empowerment, unity, basically standing together as women, but also not alienating men. We wanted this kind of message that men and women need to work together in order for us to really overcome some of the social barriers that we have as women.
The woman leading the process was South Africa's first black female brewmaster, Apiwe Kusani Mawela.
I made this beer to be like an easy drinking beer, so that every woman, whether you're a beer drinker or not, you can actually relate to it. We used a hop called Southern Passion, which is a passion fruit granadilla kind of flavors. You get that also on the nose, but it's not too much. It's not too fruity. It's not too sweet. I think it's like perfectly balanced.
A lower dose of carbon dioxide makes it smoother than most other beers, but there was no compromise on quality.
It's definitely on par with all the best beers out there in the market, but what makes it unique is that it's got very clear flavoring notes that comes through, and it tastes of a little bit of a caramel you'll taste. Also, the color is quite unique.
The limited edition lager was put to the test at a launch in Johannesburg recently.
Comparing it to other beers, I only drank Corona, and comparing it to Corona is very close to Corona, and it's a delicious beer. And yeah, I might just have a substitute.
It's quite light, which is nice. I expected it to be heavier because it's a beer, but it's quite light and airy. It's not too bitter, so I know they made it with women in mind.
I will try it on a Sunday because it's light. And it's not as strong as these other beers like your Castle Lights, your Heineken, your Coronas, but this one is light. I can try it on a Sunday, but not on a normal Friday or a long weekend.
Beer is still very much a man's game, but women were the pioneers until it became big business in the 18th century. This team is hoping that their bold brew will help women reclaim their spot in the world of beer. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, in the Republic of Congo, more and more women are turning to the public transport vehicle sector as they seek economic opportunities. They are becoming touts or wheelers, mostly in the country's capital, Brazzaville. CGTN's Alexandria Majala has their story.
Brazzaville, capital of the Republic of Congo. Female touts call out to customers, load communal taxis, and warn of the vehicle's imminent departure. Having a female tout collecting fares has now become a common sight as more and more women venture into previously male-dominated careers.
I started a long time ago, and work is evolving well. Today, for example, it was one of my colleagues who was scheduled, but since she became ill, I was called in to replace her. Everyone must take charge of themselves. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I have to stay at home and expect everything from a man. Any work that a man does, a woman can do also.
Some people ridicule us, insult us, but others praise us. For my part, I feel proud to be in this business because I do not prostitute myself or steal. I prefer to fight, and I encourage other women to do the same.
Most of the female touts or reelers are mothers. They believe that prejudice should no longer be tolerated at a time when organizations are promoting gender equality in employment opportunities. However, some see the benefit of having women in the industry.
We were the ones who were loading first, but we saw that women load well. The way they load, attract people, talk, as this one does. Since they've been here, between women and men, we choose women.
It feels good to see such a brave woman. I congratulate her because not many do this. If all women could think of doing like her, that would be good.
So far, there are about 50 female touts in Congo, all working under the Trade Union Federation of Transporters of Congo. The organization is actively pushing for the empowerment effort. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling strengthening against the dollar, and that's due to demand for the local currency from some commercial banks who are looking to meet the central bank's reserve ratio requirements. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand was steady today. It held on to that 1.17% gain against the dollar, which it registered on Wednesday, with of course, the market still pricing in a series of interest rate cuts by the US Fed. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.